Hello, and welcome to the Capital Gains Show. My name is Aaron. In this show, I like to defend capitalism and criticize socialism. Today, I'm going to do a video about the definition of anarchy, a little bit of talk about hierarchy and democracy, and why the best expression of anarchy is in a capitalist framework, not a socialist framework. Now, first, I want to bring your attention to an anarcho-communist that I discovered on YouTube. He's very well spoken, he's very intelligent, he understands the concepts. I instantly became a fan of his channel, and I suggest that everyone watching this, if you haven't already, you should go subscribe to him. His name is Brenton. It's Brenton Lengel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But yeah, like I said before, he is an anarcho-communist. He's got a very active channel. He's got a lot of really cool videos on his channel, so go check him out. Now, there's one video in particular that I want to talk about. Brenton made a 30-second video called Anarchism in 30 Seconds. And it looks like what he was doing was submitting a 30-second video for a contest where you have to describe anarchy and define it in 30 seconds or less. He really nailed it. He packed a lot of information into that 30 seconds. I don't know if I could be that succinct and give that much info in 30 seconds. So I thought it was a really good video. I'm going to provide a link to his video in the description here on my video so that you guys can watch it, so that you can understand the context. It only takes 30 seconds. I suggest you go watch it first before we continue here, just in case you haven't already watched that video, because I'm going to talk about that video. I'm going to talk about his definition, and I'm going to use it to I'm going to try to use it to defend capitalism. So what Brenton does is he says that anarchy is the idea that the burden of proof rests on the one who wants to do a hierarchy or justify a hierarchy, right? Where you have a differential in power and some kind of exchange or interaction is happening between two or more entities, right? So the burden of proof, what he says correctly, I think it's a great, he makes a really good definition. He says correctly that the hierarchy burden of proof rests on the boss or the president or the leader or the ruler or the one, making the doing the commands, as it were. Now, here's what happens. Brenton accidentally kind of admits the voluntarist argument, which is like a whole consent-based thing. And what Brenton does is he says that the burden of proof must be met to your satisfaction and everyone's satisfaction. Now, I take it by what he's implying there is that everyone who's going to have some kind of ruler or rules or something, directing them or exercising authority over that person, that it has to be done to their satisfaction, i.e. they have to agree to it, they have to consent to it, right? Now, and this has to do with, whether or not something is moral. So if I give a gift to you of my own free will and you accept it, well, that's moral. But if you steal that money or resource or gift from me instead of getting my consent to give it to you, well, then that's immoral, right? That's theft. Now, that's the difference between something that's justified and not justified, is the consent. And Brenton kind of admits it. Now, I don't think he meant to admit it in this way, but what it does is it justifies is capitalism. It justifies wage labor. It justifies rent and all those other things, as long as it's done to your satisfaction, right? So for every interaction, for every trade, every economic exchange that takes place, there's going to always be some kind of differential in power or resources. Otherwise, the trade wouldn't happen, because there would be no reason to do the arbitrage. There would be no reason to, rebalance out that differential, right? If you got a lot of bread to sell and not a lot of money, and I've got a lot of money, but I'm hungry and I need the bread, well, we've got a power differential there, and that power differential is kind of going in both ways. Is there a hierarchy there? Yeah, maybe the bread price is kind of high, or maybe there's too many bakers and the power differential rests in the advantage of the consumer, and he's got this choice from all these different bread makers, and the bread guy has to sell his bread at a lower price than he wanted to. So there's always going to be some kind of power differential there in any economic exchange. But here's the difference about when it comes to hierarchy. There's two kinds of hierarchy. There's a voluntary hierarchy and there's an involuntary hierarchy. Now, the voluntary hierarchy is when you say, yeah, I agree for you to be my boss in exchange for pay. The involuntary hierarchy is when the ruler ruler, the king or president or whatever, says, you are my subject, and I'm going to throw you in jail if you don't comply. So the real issue here is not a hierarchy. The hierarchies are always going to exist. What's going on is whether or not that hierarchy is justified, and the justification is the burden of proof is met when you consent, when you agree, when it is met to your satisfaction, to use Brenton's words. So the only way to stop voluntary hierarchies from happening is within voluntary hierarchies. Now, Brenton seems to say that a hierarchy can meet a burden of proof in certain contexts, which is refreshing because a lot of times a lot of other anarcho-communists and other socialists say that all hierarchies are unjustified, and then what they propose to stop all the hierarchies is a involuntary hierarchy, right, where there's where democracy comes out and forces its will upon everyone. So here's the thing. Brenton's video, he continues on to talk about, how anarchy will exercise itself and be realized. And he uses the phrase direct democracy, right? So what direct democracy is when all the decisions are made by popular opinion in a monopolist context. If you're going to have a macro democracy where the entire economy is democratically controlled by everyone in the economy collectively, first of all, you have to have a monopoly. And also you're going to basically have a system where a hierarchy involuntarily forces itself upon the minority vote. So you got 51% of people vote yes, 49% of people vote no. The result is 100% of the people have to go with the yes. So if you vote for the minority, or if you don't even cast a vote at all, you're not consenting to the majority opinion, the majority command, well, you're getting aggressed upon. That's a state. That's a government. You're going to have a de facto state when 51% is forcing the other 49% to do everything. So democracy, a lot of people, and now Brenton just seems to assume that democracy is like the ultimate expression of freedom, and that's pretty common in today's society. Everyone thinks democracy is like the highest evolution of human freedom or social organization. It's absolutely not. People are taught this in school because most governments are democratically operated and controlled. So most governments, when they have their public school systems, they advocate for democracy, and they say, oh, look, we've just achieved the highest state of human existence, democracy. No, there's something better than that, and it's called free markets, okay? In a free market, if 51% want a Ford and 49% want a Toyota, guess what happens? The 51% get their Fords and the 49% get their Toyotas. It's all up to individual consumer choice. And if in a free market, if there's 100 people and each person wants a different thing, so there's 100 different things that 100 different people want, then they all get their 100 little different things. But in democracy, in a macro democracy, if you have 100 people and 51% want the Ford and the 49% want the Toyota, well, everyone has to get the Ford. There are not going to be any Toyotas, you know what I mean? Now, so democracy is not the fullest expression of anti-authoritarianism. It's only marginally less authoritarian than, for example, a monarchy or some kind of, autocrat or whatever. So that's why a lot of opponents of democracy say that democracy is a dictatorship of the majority, right? It's mob rule. It's the voting horde, and whoever gets the majority vote is the one that's going to get their wish, and everyone who doesn't vote for the majority winning choice, they get oppressed. They get their choice gets overruled, and the majority opinion gets forced down their throat. So that's not anarchy. You can have democracy in a workplace in a micro sense where people consent to work at a place that's democratically run, but that's not going to be a macro democracy. See, in a micro democracy where every little worker co-op runs their own little internal democracies, what you've basically got on a macro level is a free market. There is no monopoly macro choice, you know what I mean? You just got a bunch of little individually run democracies in these little individual companies, and they all compete with each other. That's a free market on a large scale. So if you're talking about workplace democracy, you're actually in favor of free markets, whether you realize it or not. Democracy, it's an involuntary hierarchy. On a macro level, it's not anarchist. Democracy on a macro level does not meet the burden of proof that Brenton described. The reason that it doesn't meet the burden of proof is because it doesn't gain the consent of the minority vote, of the minority opinion. It only meets the burden of proof for the majority, 51%, that vote in favor of whatever it is that they're going to force happen to everyone. But it doesn't meet it for the minority. So really, it is just another form of authoritarianism. So the best, most fullest, and correct expression of anarchy, and the greatest way to respect consent, and the greatest way to meet the burden of proof, and the greatest way to meet everyone's satisfaction is to have a free market, is to have decentralized, competitive activity. The best way to meet the goal of anarchism is to have a free market, and to have competition, and to have individual autonomy, and to have voluntary hierarchies, not involuntary hierarchies. And when I say no involuntary hierarchies, that means that includes no involuntary macro democracy with the majority opinion oppressing itself onto the minority opinion. So unfortunately, what this does is it opens up the door. I mean, unfortunately for leftist anarchists and socialists and ancoms, what it does is it opens the door for wage labor. It opens the door for rent. It opens the door for absentee landlordism. It opens the door for outside investment. So it opens the door for people to work on things they don't own, and it opens the door for people to own things that they don't work on, you see. And that's the leftist anarchists really have a problem with that. But if you're going to respect consumer choice, if you're going to respect individual autonomy, if you're going to respect people's the burden of proof being met according to the subject's satisfaction, then you're going to have to make room for rent and wage labor and working on things you don't own and owning things you don't work on, and so on. It's the only way. The only way to stop rent, the only way to stop absentee landlordism is to have the involuntary hierarchy, is to have the state. You're going to have some kind of monopolized government that's going to enforce that prohibition against those voluntary interactions, because the fact of the matter is that the wage labor and the rent, those can all be voluntary. Those can all meet the burden of proof in the sense of being met by the self-satisfaction, to use Brenton's term again. So that's why capitalism is going to be the fullest and truest expression of anarchy, of freedom, of individual autonomy, and socialism is going to require a lesser form of it, where they're going to have a hierarchy, an involuntary hierarchy that forcibly stops people from making those decisions and those interactions that they agreed on, that they chose, that met their burden of proof. Their burden of proof that was met for them is going to be overruled by the socialist monopolist hierarchy, the involuntary hierarchy that's going to say, no, that outside investment is banned, that rent is banned, that wage labor is banned because you don't work at that company, you're not allowed to, because you don't own that company, you're not allowed to work at it, and if you dare try, you're going to go to gulag.